transition as soon as possible. Have you heard this before? Well, of course you have, because it's incredibly popular advice. And I'll be the first to admit, on the surface, this sounds wonderful. I started my transition at 30, and I had a really rough childhood and rough young adulthood. So, yeah, of course I have feelings about what that first puberty can do to a person. Trust me, I hear the advice and I get it. On the surface, it makes all kinds of sense. But is this actually, really, truly good advice? Well, in my opinion, no, it's not. And in fact, I would go so far as to say that it's the opposite of good advice. And before you start writing some outraged comment, first just hear me when I say that today's conversation is not about puberty blockers or young people transitioning. So all of that stuff is going to be besides the point of what I have to say. It's related, yes, but again, it's not the point. Because instead, I want to zoom in on this one piece of advice. Transition as soon as possible. And I want to explain why the implication of this perspective actually does more harm than good. And so please keep in mind that what I'm talking about here is less the literal start date of a transition, and it's more this overarching transition-related mindset of sooner is better and later is worse. And don't worry, in a few minutes, I'll share with you a much more natural, balanced way of engaging with this timing-related component of your gender exploration. But first, let's talk more about why the advice, transition ASAP, is not as helpful as we may think it is. Well, when we hear that, we implement it. First off, now I've made an enemy of time, and I've circumvented the reality of my situation in favor of a mind-based assumption about how I think things are supposed to go. And so instead of allowing for things to happen naturally and learning how to work with what is, well, now I'm in opposition to the flow of time, and I'm pushing back against the reality of my life. And as someone who has spent quite a lot of time trying to control life, I can assure you that, well, for one, it doesn't work. And two, it's not worth it whatsoever. Because in between now and then whenever I get that thing that I want so intensely, if I even get it at all, well, in the meantime, I am experiencing intense suffering. I'm experiencing this anxiety and this stress. And, keep in mind that all of this is in addition to the baseline overwhelm that is coming from simply questioning gender. So it's like I take an already challenging situation and then I make it exponentially more challenging by attempting to control it. And so then another reason that this advice is not helpful is because now being the person who is curious, being the person who is questioning, which is such a beautiful and tender stage of the journey, and it should never be rushed. Well, now this chapter is actually working against me because the only way for me to transition ASAP is if I figure my stuff out. It's like I'm going to have to jump out of this questioning phase and into the answer ASAP. Even if that means bypassing my own intuition in order to skip ahead to this presumed finish line. It's all because I don't want to be that person who gets left behind, right? And then not only that, but consider how disempowering this advice is for someone who doesn't actually have supporting parents or access to gender-affirming care, or just for whatever reason, transitioning in the near term isn't actually an option for them. Well, now, when we keep saying this advice to these people, well, now in their minds, they think that they're supposed to transition at a certain age, but in reality, they can't. And so instead of learning how to work with their circumstances, instead, they're developing all sorts of resentments about their life situation. And now they are looking at their body changes and how everything is like, it's like everything's slipping out of control, and they're feeling like they're getting deeper and deeper into this like despair and this frustration because they're assuming and they're operating within this model that they need to transition ASAP. I get that this is not the intention of that advice and it's not the overt message of the advice, but I'm more speaking about these subtle currents and how it impacts us in maybe ways that we're not even aware of if we take it and then we implement it and we've got it in the back of our minds. Our assumption is that it's got to be ASAP, and then it's not happening ASAP, and then we start freaking out, and so that's the kind of dynamic that I'm trying to highlight in this conversation. And so that's why we need a better way of speaking about the timing of a transition. And so I'm going to give you a strategy about just that. So this is going to be reframing the work to be done and pointing people towards this naturally occurring divine wisdom of their being. All right, so let's talk a little bit more about that strategy, which is going to be called transition from within the flow. And that's actually exactly what I would tell anyone who is asking me about when they should transition or when they should make that next move, whatever it happens to be. Because if there's one thing that I've learned about navigating major moments of life change, it's that there's a natural flow to the thing. It's just like how a flower opens its petals from within a certain flow of time. And so in the same way, this personal evolution, it also happens naturally and organically from within that same fluid momentum. And if you're someone who values living in the flow, then you know that your job isn't so much to control the timing of things, but instead is to work in harmony with your life circumstances and have integrity to this internal process. And then from within that place of balance, you act and make decisions that are in alignment with this natural unfolding of things. So this means that regardless of where you are along the journey or what the specifics of your circumstances are, you recognize that your job is to just take each step with care, with dignity. And so this means that you're giving yourself permission to feel each emotion and that you're defaulting to your intuition first before listening to anyone else or allowing an external perspective to sway that inner balance. And so this also means that you're tuning into these subtle currents of your life so that you can align with and harness as a sort of organic momentum to your unfolding process. And of course, if we're considering just this fluid momentum of life, well, none of that happens as soon as possible, right? But instead it's happening when the time is right. There's that saying that says nature does not hurry and yet everything is accomplished. So that's a great way of summarizing what I'm talking about. And that's because we're talking about a natural law here. It's like everything happens when it's supposed to. And so really that's what it means to transition from within the flow. You're embracing your individual pace and you're honoring what is right for you. And you're saying yes to life as it's been given to you. So if you can start making a habit of using the flow to guide your life, then you're going to be noticing that regardless of your life circumstances, life is always leading you towards where you need to go, where you need to be. And it's like it's always happening from within this natural timeline, which is unfolding organically and effortlessly. And so that perspective right there is night and day different from transition as soon as possible. Because one is saying that, well, this is what I think the timing's supposed to be. And then the other is, well, I'm just going to honor the natural unfolding of my being. Sure, each path can lead to a transition, but only one of them is going to be from within the flow. So my advice with this one is to relax. Recognize that all things happen in due time. See if you can give yourself permission to stay on the inside of this chapter. Whatever happens to be for you, you stay there for as long as you need. Because when it comes to something as meaningful as a transition, you really don't need to rush this thing. Instead, you should be getting quiet, you should be letting go of your expectations, and you should be really, truly honoring wherever it is that you are. And if you can do that, you will blossom at exactly the right moment. This it's like metaphorically, the sun's gonna be shining, the weather's gonna be warm, the bird's gonna be singing, and in your heart, you're gonna be able to just recognize, you're gonna see the circumstances of your life, like you're gonna be able to say to yourself, oh, all of this is as it's supposed to be. And if you want to learn more about transitioning from within the flow, you should watch this video and I'll tell you about how to do just that. All right, my friend, see you in the next one.